All right, we're here in section 7.2, and we're going to be talking about the inverses of our relations and functions. And we've talked about inverses before. Earlier in the year, we talked about that the additive inverse of 3 is -3, the multiplicative inverse of 5 is 1/5. And we even found inverses of matrices. Now, remember, not all matrices do have inverses, but for those that do, we can certainly use our calculator to find that out. Okay, so again, we're going to be looking at reflecting. That's kind of what it does, is it reflects it across the y equals x line. That's that diagonal line that goes through the xy axis. And it's really the same thing as just switching the x and the y's. That's what it does, really. So looking at this graph here, if we had this relation over here and we plotted that in the blue, 0, 2, 1, 5, 5, 6, 8, 9. To find the inverse, basically what we're going to do is we're just going to flippy the x and y's. So now we get those switched around. And if we graph those, kind of interesting. Yeah, there's the y equals x line in the green. And again, you can kind of see how that looks like it's reflected. That's just a matter of switching the x and y values. So the domain in the original graph becomes the range of the second of the inverse. And likewise, the range of the first graph becomes the domain, is what we have there. All right, so here's kind of what we talk about when we talk about an inverse, and we use it with the inverse notation. Notice there, it doesn't mean it's not the reciprocal of it. It just means the inverse of f of x is what that notation means. Basically, what we're going to do is if we start with a number, let's just say 3, and we put it in the function x plus 6, we know that we get 9. Well, now if we put 9 into the inverse, now again, if you're adding 6, the inverse would be subtracting 6. So if we put that in the inverse function, notice how we get back to where we started with the 3. And that's what inverses do for those relations or functions that we're talking about. Okay, so now as we talk about this, there's some easy ones where there's just one thing being done. So if the original function is x minus a half, to do the inverse, you're just going to do the inverse operation to say x plus a half. Those would be inverses of one another. All right. Now, what if we had x divided by 3? Well, the inverse would very simply be, well, the inverse of division is multiplication, so it would just be 3x is what it would be. Okay, so those are easy enough ones that just have a single operation. All right, now, again, some of them are a little more complex. So here's this trick that we're going to use. Let's say we had our function as -1/2 x minus 5. To write the inverse, now again, here's the sneaky part. F of x is really the same thing as y. So what we would do to find the inverse is we'll switch the x and the y. So now we're going to say x equals -1/2 y minus 5. And then you just solve for y. All right, so we would add the 5 to both sides. All right, -1/2 y. And then we would multiply both sides by -2. Now, a couple different ways that you could write this. You could go -2 times x plus 5. All right, that equals y. Or if you wanted to distribute that, you could say -2x minus 10. Certainly could be that. And that's what the inverse is. So we say the inverse of f of x. Again, I'll just rewrite it as the bottom one there, -2x minus 10. Be careful on multiple choice questions. You could see it in either form. Just be cognizant of that and make sure that you're able to simplify if possible. All right, let's try another one of those. All right, so now we go down to, oops, there it is. All right, so once again, this is what y is. So the first thing that we do is we switch the x and the y. X equals 2/3 y plus 2. This time we would subtract 2. So we'd get x minus 2 is equal to 2/3 y. Now, again, we would divide by 2/3, which is really the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. Let's multiply both sides by 3/2. So we'd have 3/2 x minus 2, and that's going to be equal to y. That's the inverse. So if we wanted to, in most cases, I think that we usually would distribute that. We would just say 3/2 x, and then the 2's would cancel, would be -3. There would be the inverse of that. Okay, so in section 2, we're talking about those inverse again. Switch the x and the y. We learned some strategies on how to do the functions there. So once again, yeah, like I said, enjoy, and until next time.